Hey, great to have you here. So let's just keep the train going and talk more about One Piece. I played my first tournament today and wanted to share a little bit about the experience with that. I mentioned before that I've played casually at my local store, so I've had the experience of playing against opponents and so forth at a semi-competitive level. And I figured let's take the next step and do a tournament. Didn't expect too much of a ramp up since it's just a local tournament. Nothing like a treasure cup or a regional or anything like that, just a local tournament. Did all right overall. Wound up going 2-2, got a pack, or I guess a card specifically for being in that tournament, and just wanted to share the experience, as I said, about that. So I've talked a little bit about this before, but I've been playing Red Zoro. He's a relatively basic card. He comes in OP1 specifically, and his power is you give him a Don, all of your characters get 1,000 power. So my goal typically with him is to put bodies on the board, and to this point in time, I haven't exactly intended to build a deck specifically. So to this point in time, I've just gotten starter decks and booster boxes, as you've seen previously on the channel. I haven't bought single cards, which really it seems like if you're trying to play competitively, the goal should be let's buy singles of exactly what I need in order to better my deck and help my chances of winning. I haven't done that to this point. It's possible I'll do that. I've been a little reluctant to buy single cards just because I'm not positive the direction I want to go with. I am really enjoying Red, specifically Zoro, so it's realistic I'll stick with this at least for a little bit of time. Maybe reasonable for me to pick up some singles. I think something like Kid and Killer, which a relatively low cost rush could be a good addition to my deck, but for now we're just sticking with what we have, and then maybe in the future we may add to it. But as I said, rolled with the Red Zoro today with my combination of a deck of starter one, and then a lot of OP1, and then a little bit of mixed in with OP7 and 2 and 3, and I don't think there's any 5 in my deck. Most of my cards, as I mentioned, are low-cost players. They're getting bodies out on the board and hoping to attack as much as possible, depending on my opponent. I realize some opponents, I may not be wanting to attack them repeatedly because I'm putting my guys at risk or maybe helping them by doing that. So for the sake of who I played today, I think that strategy worked out okay. I mostly have just lower-cost guys that I can ramp up the Don with my leader as well as other Don on those characters as well. I have somewhat of a unique twist to my deck that I don't think most people use that may not be super advantageous to me, but I have like the Dagger and Magara double attack, and then I have the regular Magara that throws 3,000 on a 1-cost character, so I'll combine those where I make a 1-cost red character have a little bit more power than they would normally have, and then have a double attack, which generally leads to them really trying to block that, which they may wind up doing, they may not. It just depends on who I'm facing. I think the goal really there is to just have that aggressive play style, and I probably could use a little bit more 1-cost 3-power characters to help benefit that strategy. A lot of times I'll throw it on somebody who starts with like 1,000 power, maybe 2,000 power. So it takes a little bit of time for that to really ramp up, because when you think about adding 3,000 and then you have Zoro's effect and then maybe you have a couple down left, you may only be doing a double attack for like 7k, which really isn't as much as you should be doing for that because they're going to really try to block that. But either way, that's for the most part how my deck plays. And my first matchup was against Rob Lucci, and this person I faced against was relatively experienced. I haven't faced a lot of Rob Lucci in the past. When I played casuals, I may have faced him one time before, so this was a relatively new experience for me. I was aware of what he did as far as his abilities, so when attacking, he trashes 2 cards from the top of his deck, and then he gives a specific opponent character -1 power, or -1 cost rather, and that ability is really to help knock people off the board with KOs and so forth, and put good cards in his trash, or just more cards that he ultimately pulled from. I realize Lucci's one of the primetime characters, or primetime leaders. My understanding to this point in time, as far as the meta leaders, with LoL eventually going away, I don't know if people are still playing with him until he gets banned, but you have Lucci, you have Enel, you have Bonnie, you have Nami's probably the back end of it, and then you have Black Yellow Luffy. So those are the 5 that my understanding are kind of the top tiers. As I said, Nami's probably on the back end of that. I think she is going to be a little bit better with LoL being gone. And then you have your second tier of things like Vinsmoke Reiju and Blue Boa and so forth. So there's probably change that will take place, but that's my general understanding. Rob Lucci is a primetime S tier character at this point in time, even after getting Enos Lobby banned. And I did want to point out too, it was kind of funny, when I played the tournament, they were missing one person in order to increase the amount of awards or winner awards that they could give out. And my wife came with me, and she's played as well, but she wasn't planning to play that day. And they were like, we need one more person to give one more winner card out. And she got talked into playing. So that was kind of a funny story where she just didn't intend to play. She brought her cards because her and I ran through it a little bit beforehand, but she wound up jumping in. So it was super fun having that happen. And then when I played against Lucci, I wound up going to overtime with Lucci. So I wasn't overly familiar with overtime because this is my first tournament, but you essentially, I believe there's 4 turns from there, or 3 turns, but one of them counts as 0. So everybody gets 2 turns essentially to be attacking, is my understanding. And when that happened, I believe we both had a couple life at that point, and it was my turn. I took him down to no life cards. I'm trying to remember this as much as possible. Took him down to no life cards, and I was readying for my attack the following turn, but he wound up hitting me pretty hard during his turn, which ended things there. I didn't have a whole lot of counter in my hand, and that really just settled things there. My blockers I had played before were not there any longer, and I think I even had 2 blockers underneath in my life card area. So wound up losing that first game in overtime, but pretty good experience, and I was relatively proud of taking what should be one of the best leaders to an overtime situation. My vague understanding of how you approach Lucci, you want to take him out quickly because the longer the game goes, the less likely there's a chance that you'll win. So I realized that, and ultimately hung in there as long as possible, but time got the better of me, and he eventually had the KO punch there at the end. So lost the first match to Lucci, and then the second matchup. So if you're not familiar how they typically do things, once you play and you put in the system how you did, they then match up next people. So I think the person I played second also lost their first game. And he played a bit of a unique character. I think he was same amount of play time for the most part as me, maybe a little bit longer, but he played a yellow-red Sabo, which I hadn't seen before. His ability is if you give him a down once per turn, you may add one of your characters with a cost of 3 or more and 7,000 power or more to the top of your life cards face up. Up to one of your characters gain 2,000 power until the start of your next turn. So very interesting ability. A lot of intricacies with that. So I'm not sure how easy, that feels kind of challenging to maneuver, but if you can pull it off, it may be a good value add. And played him relatively closely. He, at one point, I was going to put out a blocker, but waited until the following turn, and he wound up doing a double attack. So he did get that through, which was rough to take, but I guess the value there is you pulled a couple cards. And then ultimately, I wound up getting 5 bodies on the board, character-wise, and just gave each of them a few Dawn. I wasn't sure how it was going to go, so I kind of slow played it, but gave each of them a few Dawn, and ultimately, I think the 4th character took him out. So wound up going 1-1 at that point, and then from there, played against the next opponent, which played Black-Yellow Luffy. So going back to who I expect to see in these type of events, that's the one difference I would say from casual to tournament, which you would expect. You play against leaders that are dominant for the most part. Nobody's testing out certain leaders, and nobody's necessarily wanting to play with something that they don't feel like they can win with. I didn't necessarily go with that strategy. I knew today wasn't going to be like a dominating type of day with the deck that I have, but I wanted to play a tournament and just get the experience of doing that. Honestly, I said if I won it all today, that'd be a victory in itself. So played Black-Yellow Luffy. I think he may have not gotten the cards that he was hoping to get. There was a lot of times he put something out. He did a lot of things with, if you're familiar with Black-Yellow Luffy, he would have his Luffy move to the trash, KO somebody. They would ultimately get the kids out and put 2 life. But I went with the approach, Luffy's power, if you're not aware, which the one thing that can counter it really well is the fact that your face-up life cards are placed at the bottom of your deck instead of added to your hand. So he can't just cycle the same thing over and over again. So that's a nice addition because you know when you attack him at some point, those lives aren't going to his hand, so he's not getting more and more counter. And I feel like I did a good job of starving his resources in this matchup just because he only had a couple cards when I was really attacking him. And if you give Luffy 2 Dawn, you may trash 1 card from your hand. And then if you have 0 life, you add up to 2 characters of cost 5 from your hand or trash to the top of your life face up. So he did that a couple times to me. With that in mind, you do not want to leave Luffy at 0 life at any point. I think there was one time I may have had him at 1 life, and then he chose to take the extra life or take his life away. So he forced himself to zeros, which I couldn't entirely control. But ultimately, as I said, I think me having multiple attackers and really resource starving him. So whenever he did something, I tried to make sure his characters were cleared off before necessarily going heavy into his leader right away. So wound up doing that. Ultimately came out on top in that matchup as well. But another tough one with Black Yellow Luffy. And I feel like I've done okay, honestly, against Black Yellow Luffy. He's pitched as being a top tier opponent, and he probably still is. But in casuals, I have played against Luffy a few times, whereas Lucci and that Sabo I hadn't really played before. The Black Yellow Luffy I've played pretty heavily in casuals, and I think I have a winning record against him with my Red Zoro deck. I'm not sure if it's just he doesn't respond well to aggressive play styles, but overall I feel like I've done okay against him. So then I faced up my fourth opponent. He was using Black Yellow Luffy again as well, and I thought that matchup was going pretty well for the most part. Similar to the first one, we wound up going to overtime, so it became a time situation at that point. I think he had 1 life at that point, and I didn't want to attack him and risk him using his ability. And I had 2 life and a blocker on the board. I made a pretty big mistake here, but you kind of live with it and you learn from it. I had a 1k and a 2k counter in my hand. Putting them out didn't do much, but I figured I have 2 life, I have a blocker. He only has 3 people that can attack me right now, so I should be good. Or he may have only had... Yeah, I think he only had 2 people that could attack me. He had his leader and one of his characters. Instead of keeping those as counter, I ultimately played them out there because I thought, it's possible you may need more bodies to hit with when it's my turn again, and I didn't want to have to waste Don on them. I wanted to put Don on them to make it more powerful. I had a Rush Luffy in my hand, though, so I probably should have just held that counter. I think I could have wound up winning if I did that, but as I said, you play, you learn from it. He wound up on his turn, negating my blocker. I forgot exactly what he did to do it, but blocker was out of the picture, so that really did not set me up well. And then I knew he had this card in his hand, so I should have been prepared for it. But as I said, I didn't expect my blocker to be taken out. He winds up playing a rush card. I think it was like a rush ace, I believe. 7 power ace or something like that. And he puts him out there, and then he puts the rest of his Don into his attack. So his leader, that one character he had out there, and ace all attack me for a decent amount of Don. As I said, I would have been able to block it if I kept those counter cards in my hand, but for some reason I chose to play them. And he wound up winning with that last turn. If he didn't kill me there, I was definitely taking him out next turn, but as I said, it's all in good fun. You live and you learn. So wound up going 2-2 overall, which I think for my first tournament was not too bad. Great learning experience. I potentially will look to improve my deck going forward. We'll see. As I said, for now, I'm still fine doing what I'm doing. It works effectively enough, and we'll just kind of go from there at this point. But really great experience doing the tournament, and was just as enjoyable as casuals. Obviously, there's a little bit more pressure when you're playing competitively instead of casually, and you have things like the overtime. Like technically, if we want to say like sports rules, I went into overtime on my 2 losses, so I was 2-0-2 if we're going to be technical. But no, that was kind of cool to be able to see what that experience was like, because I'd never done the overtime thing. So doing it a couple times was a way to learn how to play around that, and just a good way to see what works, what doesn't, and so forth. So it's all a learning experience this far. So what do you guys think? Have you entered in tournaments? How have they gone for you? I'm definitely going to do more of these in the future, so plan to make more videos on that. If you want to see more of that, let me know as well. I don't think there's a regular tournament until sometime later next month. I think there's a Treasure Cup coming up, and then I think there are things like regionals and so forth, which I'm not at that point yet. Maybe sometime in the future, because technically at the very beginning I said, I'm just going to play with my wife, I'm not going to play at all. And then we played casuals, and I told her, I'm not going to do tournaments, I'm just going to do casuals. Well, now we're doing tournaments, so we'll see. I'm not going to commit to anything, because if I do, it's going to wind up getting more intense afterwards anyway. So as I said, overall went 2-2. Great experience of doing the tournament. I encourage you guys to do it if there's any locals near you where you're a little bit hesitant. It's a fun experience. People are generally nice. There was actually a time where when I was playing the Black Yellow Luffy, what really got me was when he played the kids, his Luffy would get 7 power for my turn also. So if I was going to hit him, I had to do 7 or more, which for my low-cost characters, where I'm technically my goal is to swing for like 5 to 6 just with like 4 or 5 people. So when he gets that up there, that presents a challenge to me. And I attacked him at one point with my leader. Thankfully, I had 7. But I was like, oh, wait, I forgot that you did have that. He was going to let me take it back. But I'm like, I don't care. I'm not taking this super seriously. He 1K countered out of it, but I was fine with it ultimately. But either way, you do the tournaments, you learn from it and so forth. So as I said, what do you guys think? Have you done tournaments locally? What's gone well? Is there any cards that you think for my Zoro deck that you recommend? As I said, I kind of just have what I have for my starter deck, from starter deck 1, as well as mainly OP01 with a handful of 2, 3, and 7 thrown in there, like the Magara situation, which is just a little bit of a curveball. So I know Zoro is supposed to be a thing for upcoming OPs, as well as maybe switching to something like a Rush away from Zoro approach. I think Sanji Rush is supposed to be OP9, something like that. So we'll see how it goes. I am really enjoying Red, even though I've built a Nami deck as well, which similar situation. I don't have optimized cards for that because I'm just playing what I've pulled from booster boxes. We'll see if I look to add those more cards in the future, but for now, just enjoyed the experience. So as I said, I know I've rambled on long enough, but any comments down below, your experience with tournaments or just your thoughts on my experience and so forth. Would love to see that. Appreciate you guys so much for watching and hope to talk to you again soon.